So once your audio is pretty good to go, now I like to, over in my sequences, I'm gonna just duplicate it and I am gonna create draft number 2. And I like to note what I did. So I say draft 1 and maybe I'll say audio. Like I edited the audio is good to go. And now I'm gonna say draft 2, and I'm gonna make it my B-roll. I'm gonna add B-roll. Great. So now I double click it to open it over here. I'm gonna cancel out of draft 1. I like to duplicate drafts so that I can have copies of them and come back to them later. And now we're gonna import the photographs that we have. So maybe your person sent you some photographs. So I'm gonna, again, the bottom left, I'm gonna double click and I'm gonna go to the photos and I'm gonna import all of these photographs that were sent to me. So these photographs were sent to us. I'm gonna make this big again so that you can see. Great. And if you drag them onto your timeline, they might not be quite big enough. So one of the things that you can do, for example, the video file is just a larger file. There's more pixels in it. So the photo appears really small. You can right click and go to scale to frame size, and it will boost it to be as big as your frame. But you can see that you can still see the video underneath it. It's not quite big enough. So now we're gonna make sure that that's selected. The cursor has to be over your picture, because if it's not, you can't see the picture anymore. So you want it to be over the picture. You're gonna click the picture, and if you double click it, and then over here you wanna go to the effects controls panel. And this cursor, you can see, moves the cursor down here on the timeline. So this cursor is telling you how long the photograph is on your timeline. And scale, I'm just gonna zoom in. So I actually want it to be zoomed in, and I'm gonna click motion, and I can kind of reposition it if I want it to be a little bit lower, like that. So that is one way that I can make my photographs the right size, is to go over here to the effects control panel. If I want to add movement to a picture, I will press these little anchor points and say, I want the photograph to start here at this point of the timeline. And then by the time it gets here, I actually want it to be zoomed in. And maybe I want it to be moved a little bit, right? Maybe I want it to go like that. And it's gonna create 2 new anchor points. So now, watch, the cursor's going from these points to this point, and the photograph is moving. It's zooming in a little bit.
Training is
and then once the cursor goes past the picture, it no longer shows, because it shows what's happening underneath. Okay, so that is very helpful for adding a little bit of movement. I will tell you that a tiny bit of movement goes a very long way. If you were going to actually up here, if you want to say, okay, I'm just going to delete those, and I want it actually here, I want it to be super zoomed in. Okay, like let's watch that.
For me, when I was in training, is
I think that just sometimes it overdoes it and it feels a little intense. Well, maybe it wasn't as intense as it should be. For example, I'm gonna move this little point over and watch, it'll go really fast.
For me, when I was in training, is
so you can do that, and sometimes that's beneficial, but I think often people just have a slight bit of motion, and it is very, very, very beneficial. Okay, great. So that's one of the ways that you can handle photographs. Great, so that's one way that you wanna do it. I'm gonna drop another photo on here. This one's really, really tiny. So if I go back to, I kind of clicked it, open the effects controls panel. And if I zoom in, sometimes it'll be just like, doesn't get big enough. It's like, it's not possible for it to be that big. So that might be a photograph that I decide not to use. Or if we have this photograph and I want to zoom in, but it's not able to zoom in as far as I want, but I still really want to use it, I need to create something to play behind this image so that it covers up the video. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to File, New, and create what's called a legacy title. Photoshop has, and I know that I'm just gonna make this a white box, so I'm gonna call it white so that I know what it is. this is Photoshop updated the way that they put titles on their videos, but right now I'm just going to do a legacy title so that we can use that. All right, so it opens up this window where you can edit something that goes on top of your video, but it shows you where the cursor is. So if I move the cursor down here, it's showing me now what is happening there. So I want, for this, it doesn't necessarily matter, but if you're making a title, you want your cursor to be over where the title is going to appear. But I'm just creating a background. So over here, I'm gonna create this little shape, and I'm just gonna draw a big white box. Over here's the color. I'm gonna make it be a true white. You can make it like a true black, a true white. You can make it kind of whatever color you want. If you're over here, you're like, oh, I want it to be blue. I want it to actually just be white. So I'm gonna go over here and show it to white. That's the color it currently is. This is the color it's going to be. And that's all I'm gonna do at this moment. And it creates this title over in the bottom left. So I'm gonna pull that onto the timeline. And this is the photograph. And this is my white title. So if you wanna put the title behind the photograph, you actually have to raise the photograph up. So this is the photo, and now I'm going to move that title card behind it, okay? So that allows you to create something that's behind your photograph. Another thing that you might do, for example, I'm gonna double click some of these to figure out another picture that I might wanna put up there. Let's say I'm gonna put this photo on here. Let's say I wanna draw this photo. So I dropped this photo onto the timeline, and you can also, the same as video, drag it out for as long as you want to, or make it as short as possible. I think it's helpful for photos to kind of come in and leave when someone is saying something. And I think it's helpful sometimes for them to cover a cut. If you are only using one video, you would actually want to cover where the cuts are so that you don't see, like visually watch him talking.
Yes.
You can see that cut. So if you only had one camera, you would use B-roll or images to actually cover that cut. So when he's talking,
I got 13 years. And I'm not like,
you wouldn't really see, you wouldn't see.
I'm 48 now, so I got 13 years. And I'm not like the regular people like.
It would cover that cut, so it wouldn't be so obvious that you made that cut. All right, another thing that you can do if you want to, I'm going to hold down Option, which copies. So I'm holding down Option, and this top one, I'm gonna go back to my effects controls panel. My effects controls, and I want this top photo to be a little bit smaller, but I want this photo in the back. So this one on the background, I'm gonna go over to effects, and I'm gonna go to video effects, and I'm gonna use something called the Gaussian blur. I never know how to pronounce that. But when you put an effect on something, it appears in the effects panel over here. So I'm gonna make it 80% blurry. Maybe you want it to be 70% blurry, but it kind of blurs the outside of that image. And maybe I want to scale it in a bit more so that you can't see those edges. You kind of saw those edges. I want to scale it a bit more so that you don't see those edges. This is another thing that you can do. Newscasts often do this, especially when you use vertical video. They play the video really big in the background, super blurry to make it a little bit more interesting. So that's another option. There's lots of options. But adding that little bit of movement with your keyframes is helpful. Thinking in terms of layers, is there something that needs to go behind the picture or behind the video? Those things are helpful. So hopefully that helps you a lot.